And welcome back to Taxation is Theft, the show that tells you all the ways the government is ripping you off and screwing you and stealing your money so that you can't live your life the way you want to. Broadcasting live on Facebook and YouTube from an underground bunker deep within the jungles of Mexico, I'm Dan, Taxation is Theft Berman, former president of the United States, currently in the race for governor of Texas. Today, I've got John Molnar. He's a vet who fought in Iraq and was horrified by what he saw. Now he's in running for Congress to make a change. John thinks the politicians that happily start these wars need to face the consequences for their own actions. They have blood on their hands, and they have to pay for their decisions. But before we get started, of course, Pitch Fest. Go buy t-shirts. Taxationistheft.cards. Head on over there, support the show, get a t-shirt, get an awesome, amazing hat like the one I've got on. Taxation is Theft flags. Stick them out in front of your house, piss off your HOA. Wear them when you go down to pay your property taxes or to hang out at the DMV all day while they treat you like shit so you can pay them taxes. So many perfect places. In fact, go get this shirt that I have on here. Taxes Pay Killer Cops. That's a popular shirt right now with all the shit that's going on. Thanks to our friends, the government. But anyways, on to the show. John, welcome. How's it going?
It's going good, Dan. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely, of course. So we were just talking before the show a little bit, and I know we should have just started streaming that because that was awesome. But yeah, we were talking actually about something that I think is extremely important. So, like, you already got bonus points with me on that. That this isn't, like, it's easy to say, like, yeah, I guess I'll put my name on a ballot. But to actually do something with your campaign, to actually, like, get out there and try and fight for it. But then not only that, to like, dedicate yourself to say, like, I understand the deck is stacked against me. The chances of me winning are not that high. But doesn't matter. Even if I lose, I'm going to do it again. That's like, I think that's such an important issue. Like, what's motivating you to throw your hat in the ring, so to speak?
So, I mean, there's a lot of things that are motivating me to throw my hat into the ring. One of the big things was, I kind of listened when Steve Jobs said that life starts to look a whole lot different when you realize that everything around you that we call life was created by people who are no smarter than you. I mean, during the last election cycle, we saw Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez won, and I don't agree with her on a lot of things, but I do have to credit her for being a huge motivation in me wanting to run. She's only a year older than me, was a bartender, had never served in the military, whereas I have military experience, fought in Iraq, and it was just kind of looking at it like, you know what, if she can do it, so can I. So that plays a big part in it, was just seeing a lot of people out there that I didn't think really were all that different than me, and, I'm just going to go for it, was kind of my attitude.
Awesome. Yeah, and it's just fucking weird. Like, I remember when I was a kid, like, we were, like, in science class, we would talk about, like, oh, yeah, what are we going to do to prevent global warming and this sort of stuff? Like, yeah, it's been around that long.
Yep.
But it's like, it always was like, for some reason, it was always just like, oh, well, the government's going to fix it and everything's going to be wonderful because we have all these smart people in Congress and, like, they're like, they're so old and wise. And it's like, no, these people are absolute complete morons that don't know what the hell they're doing.
Yeah, and a real quick way to find out just how stupid people in charge are is to serve in the military.
Well, what did you see that made you think that?
That's something we could go into for a couple hours just on its own. But one of the big things was, when I was over in Iraq, there just wasn't really a clear desire to actually win any type of goal that we were doing. The goal was basically just to be there, maintain the status quo, and keep filling the military industrial complex.
But isn't that so I've heard, like, some of these, because I listen to, like, some of these motivational stuff, right? And, like, a lot of these guys are, like, ex-Marines and whatever, and they're like, yeah, I learned this in the military, like, you have to go out and get what you want, and, like, And it's like, I would think isn't this like the mindset that they put a lot of the military in, or is that no? Is that just like a few people that just come out like that, or maybe they were already like that going in?
So the military is a little different. You've got people from all different types of backgrounds, all different types of mindsets, and everything else in between. You're going to be serving right alongside with people that you had no idea even existed because of their personality traits, their backgrounds, whatever the case might be. The military is the definition of a melting pot. So you can get all types of everybody right there, serving right alongside with each other. I mean, I joined in 2008, right during the height of the surge. So they were bringing in everybody and anybody. I had people who were former Latin kings I was fighting alongside against, people who weren't even citizens of the country, and then people who had just lost their jobs and were trying to make a paycheck. So you've got people coming from all different types of backgrounds, all different types of reasons to be in.
Interesting. And so you just thought that I mean, like, there was no purpose to you being there other than to, well, I guess there was a purpose, but just not like a purpose to actually win and restore freedom and all these other, defeat Al Qaeda and all these other things that we were being told was the whole purpose of the war.
I mean, exactly. And I mean, my whole job when I was there, I deployed to Iraq in 2010, was there for a 12-month deployment, came back in 2011. I was the last rotation before the drawdown. And so when I was there, we were trying to make Iraq a better place than we found it, make sure that it was nice and stable for us to leave and hand off to the local leadership in Iraq. We leave. We didn't really do that job. And what happened? ISIS came in and knocked everything over. So, we've got all this stuff where, you've got people like me who go out there, we fight these wars, we fight for something we believe in, we try and leave Iraq a better place than we found it, and we leave and we see ISIS come in and just completely destroy everything that we've done.
What was it like? Sorry if we're going off topic from your campaign. I definitely want to talk a lot about that. But
no, that's fine.
Okay, when I picture ISIS coming in, I only picture that as being possible if the majority of Iraq is unarmed. Is that? I mean, obviously there's no Second Amendment there. Was the general population armed, or were they prohibited from being armed, or how did that work?
So, I mean, where I was in Iraq, basically everybody has a AK-47. They have some type of Kalashnikov. The only thing that people don't really have is a sidearm. That stemmed from back during Saddam's days, before I even got there. My understanding is it's a cultural thing where it's only the upper class that has a pistol or a sidearm. And so everybody will pretty much have a Kalashnikov, but any type of handgun usually gets associated with more like execution, or you're really high up into something or part of the government itself. So, I mean, as far as actually having weapons, they do have them. There's just a lot when it comes to organization or infrastructure and other things like that make it really hard for them to work together. On top of the fact that you have a lot of cultural differences inside of Iraq that make it hard for some of those people to get along, whether it's the Kurds and then the Arabs or the Yazidis. And then even within the Arabs, you have Sunni versus Shia Muslim. And so there's a lot of differences that go on in Iraq. It's a very complicated area that gets really hard for especially Americans to understand, just because the culture is so drastically different from our own.
Right. And then so ISIS, of course, is organized, and they're able to come in and do whatever they want.
Yeah, I mean, we saw how quickly they spread right throughout the Middle East. They just kind of went in and took over as soon as we started looking like we were pulling out of Iraq. They just came right in. That was one of the hard things when you're announcing we're going to leave at this date instead of just pulling out. Then they have a timeline to get set up to be able to go move right in and do that invasion. So,
although I would think even if you did just leave, then they'd still, I don't know, maybe if you did just leave, then the locals would have an opportunity to fortify themselves first.
The difference, I mean, the difference in my eyes is if you announce when you're leaving at X date, then you're giving the adversary the time to prep for when you leave, versus just, hey, we left, and then they have to hurry and scramble to try and figure things out. They don't have that time to get organized and prepare for when you do leave.
Right. Interesting. Well, so let's come back to the U.S. So, what is it you're running for, and why did you choose this position over some other?
So I'm running for Utah's 4th District Representative in the United States House this year. This is my first political campaign, but I decided to go for Congress just because of that military intelligence and Iraq background. When you get into international affairs, Department of Homeland Security, or veteran affairs, things like that, that's where my expertise is, because that's the stuff I have experience in. I've already had experience in preventing international incidents, building and maintaining strategic relationships with the United States with foreign entities, and then the VA is something that I live with myself, being a veteran. So when it comes down to just the things that I have practical experience and understanding in, Congress made the most sense. And then obviously we're going now because I'm 29 and the minimum age for Congress is 25. So we had to wait till we got into there.
Awesome. So yeah, that really sounds great. And we were talking earlier about how you might actually have an opportunity to get into a debate. Um, and we were talking about whether or not they're playing dirty, because of course, when we talk about the presidential race, we know we know they're playing dirty. But
Yeah.
what does the situation look like as far as having a debate for your race?
So the debates were kind of just fingers crossed right now, waiting to see what the results come in at. The month of August, the Utah Debate Commission was going to run a poll to see which candidates would qualify for their debates. Our threshold, we had to be at 10% plus or minus the margin of error of about, it's either 2.5 or 3.5%. And we got up to 5% and we're holding in the polls. And then that month of August, the media took our name out of any mention to do with the campaign. So now we're not quite sure if that's going to affect us negatively or if we're still going to make that 10% mark to get into those debates this October. But I mean, we're keeping our fingers crossed. We're really hoping that we're getting in there. We've gotten a lot of attention. It's a top 10 most heavily watched congressional race in the country. So we've got a lot of publicity and a lot of eyes on the campaign, more so than we would normally have.
I wonder, when they take your name out of the debate. So, okay, with Joe, right? It's like, okay, who's doing the debates? Fox News, CNN, and those are like fortresses to get in, right? But I would think you've got some local media who is taking care of, who's conducting these polls, and is it somebody that you'd be able to like call them up and ask them why did that happen? Because I'm curious, and not that you might get a real answer, but you might have like somebody in the office that was like, yeah, well, I didn't agree with it, but like apparently one of the Republicans you were running against called and said we're not allowed, and he's friends with the studio. Like, I don't know, there might be some story like that.
I mean, I've sent out emails and stuff whenever I catch it and I don't get any response, but then I'll notice occasionally I'll see somebody that supports me mention in the comments of the article being like, oh no, hey, John Molnar's in this race too, the Libertarian candidate. And they'll hurry and correct it with like a little line of it real quick. But otherwise, if it's me emailing them, they tend to try and ignore me.
Right.
So I mean, it sucks, but it's a game we just got to play. We don't get to make the rules. Unfortunately, as much as I want to fight and rail against them, I still got to play the rules, same as everybody else, and just try and keep making as much noise as possible to get around it.
Right. Yeah, it really is screwed up, but it's like, well, I mean, there's the, what's her name? Aria in, where was that? The anarchist transsexual. Did you see this?
New Hampshire.
Yeah, so she actually put out a statement saying, people were mad at her, and she's like, "What are you mad at me for? You're the idiots who voted for somebody just because they had an R next to their name."
Yeah.
And it's like, it's ridiculous because it's this is the system that we have, and people are doing the same thing, and then they're falling for this shit with the polls. Like, it's funny. And I remember, like, I used to think this, right? Like, I used to think, like, I would see the polls and I would be like, oh yeah, well, they just polled, they only poll the serious candidates or the candidates who can actually win. And it took me a long time to come around and realize, like, no, they're like, the reason they leave all the other candidates out is because well, one, yes, nobody knows who they are, but nobody knows who they are because the media won't talk about them.
Right.
Like, that is,
it's
like,
cyclical.
It's the starting line. Like the starting
Yeah.
line is who the media picks, and they've got connections. This isn't just like, oh yeah, this is the one raising the most money, and that's part of it. But no, there are connections between these organizations. It's nuts.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely. It's something that they just kind of, it's definitely like a good old boy system. I've gotten the feeling of it's almost like you have to be famous before you get in to even have a chance of being in. So it's something that I'm kind of taking a look at and analyzing. And I mean, if we don't end up winning this November, then there's going to be round 2 in 22. So we'll just take what we learned from this one and apply it right to the next one. Try and keep pushing against
nice.
that going
I like it.
forward. So, I mean, it's a pain in the ass, don't get me wrong,
Yeah.
but learning process really is the way I'm trying to look at it. Is just, okay, what is it that's going a certain way, and how do we fight it next time? So, I mean, it's just kind of looking like next time we got to be bigger and louder than we were this time if we don't end up making it work. So,
Right. So now, do you have like a strategy? Whether or not you get into a debate, do you have a strategy to kind of do the most damage that you can?
so we've been very social media heavy. Luckily, with COVID-19 kicking in, that kind of evened the playing field, I felt a little bit for a while, just because I am by far a lot younger than my opponents. And so I had a better adaptation to social media just real quick. Could throw everything on there and still keep everything moving through all the lockdowns and everything without missing a beat. And now that we're getting into more openness here in Utah, I mean, we've got billboards that are coming out this week, and then probably start trying to get some in-person stuff going here soon. We just had the rally with Spike Cohen out here in Salt Lake City about 2 weeks ago. And so we're looking to start kicking up the in-person stuff again. But social media definitely seems to be the way that kind of evens the playing field a lot more, because we can get around that need for spending with cable news or newspapers or anything like that, and still be able to reach the people while dealing with all of the ridiculous COVID guidelines.
Right. Yeah, and it is definitely a lot less expensive. But I don't know. I feel like there's a certain like maybe an older crowd that isn't quite on the social media yet that you're not able to reach as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of why we want to keep doing some of the in-person stuff. And luckily, we're starting to see some reduction in some of the counties. We've still got like Salt Lake County is pretty stringent on their restrictions with gatherings or anything like that. But the nice thing that I've noticed is the younger crowd is easier to reach on Twitter and YouTube, whereas for the older crowd, it seems like they're a lot more heavy on Facebook.
Really?
So we're still able to reach kind of a little bit in between the two, just because of identifying the difference in generations in which social media platform they actually tend to use.
Interesting. Um, that's like I feel like that's the opposite of my experience, just because I don't know. Twitter seems like that's where you get like the more and like maybe I just like the randomness of the algorithms. I ended up in a different place. Twitter, I seem to get like more serious, more mature people, but there's still plenty of trolls on there. And then
Oh yeah.
Facebook, I don't know. There's Facebook. There's a lot of adults too, but they're just like it's like nobody's there to do anything serious. Like Facebook seems like just those are just people who are just on there to shit post and memes and all that stuff.
See,
Um,
and that's how I feel about Twitter, is Twitter being the cesspool of all social media, in my opinion. I mean, my
that's so
personal favorite is
weird.
Instagram. But like Instagram, you just sit there, look at a picture of somebody's dog or a car. You don't have to hear their opinion on anything.
Instagram is where all my teenage following comes from.
Yeah, I get a lot of those with the car posts and stuff. I had to get rid of TikTok though. That one was like, everybody was like high school or middle school. I was like, I can't
Oh
do
wow.
TikTok anymore.
Yeah, I've still been. I've been trying to get in there to like make some posts and because I do still want to reach people, and in fact like I don't want to knock reaching younger kids too, because like a lot of support from my campaign was they weren't old enough to vote,
Right.
but they were also like they were in high school or middle school learning about government, and it's like this is really a prime time to talk to them about some of this stuff, because if we don't now, and if their parents don't, which a lot of parents are just, go to school and learn what they teach you. That's what my parents were for most of the time. Um, like they're just gonna get indoctrinated with like all this bullshit.
Yeah.
So, like I really see that as extremely valuable. Even, and I know that's like it doesn't help your campaign. Maybe it helps your next cycle, uh, but yeah, I see it as for the movement as a whole as extremely valuable. And who knows, maybe they'll get their parents to
Yeah.
vote for you.
Well, and I mean, I think there's definitely value in trying to reach out to that age group in and of itself. But I mean, from what I saw with TikTok, that just didn't seem to be what people were on TikTok for. They were on
Right,
there
right.
for everybody to get into their, bikini or board shorts and copy the same dance that the other person was doing. They didn't want to
Yeah.
hear about politics.
Well,
So,
there's uh this guy I want to use the correct name because I know him by so many different names. I think
okay.
Tyler 420 is the one he's going by now. Um, he's actually I've and like I don't spend much time on TikTok, but I've seen a lot of the videos that he also posts on Facebook where he gets very political, and
Yeah.
it's it's interesting. Well, I guess it's more like social political. Like he's talking about, people make these stupid videos about, calling someone an idiot or talking shit about this or that, Black Lives Matter, that sort of thing. And he comes on and he kind of tears apart their, I guess their logical fallacies and that sort of thing. And
Yeah.
has like some, but it is kind of political, and he's doing really well. I think he just hit like 100,000 followers.
Oh, wow.
Um, but yeah, so it's interesting. But I guess my point is that like it's weird that we're having different experiences on these platforms, but at the same time, it's probably just like we're working our way into these little corners of this is what people are talking about over here, and then once you're in there, the algorithms are like, well, that's the corner he's in, and he seems to be happy there.
Yeah, it definitely seems like the
That's where he'll
algorithms tend
stay.
to work to boxing you into a corner.
Yeah. Man. So what's like, do you have any plans as far as like policies? Like, what do you think are the most important things that we need to fix? And this is a federal position.
Yeah.
So like, what do you think are the most important things that we need to fix at the federal level?
So a lot of things that I think we could be fixing. The biggest thing that I found when I was talking to people and I was listening to the news and all the headlines, and then again getting out talking to people to verify everything, was that there was one common denominator in everybody's concern. Whether we were talking about the economy, healthcare, whatever the case might be, there always seemed to be this common denominator of that the politicians just have this total disconnect between the policies they're enacting on us and the consequences of those very same policies. A lot of the times they pass laws that apply to us, but don't apply to them. And so there's been that disconnect to where the politicians just don't really understand where the people are coming from. People don't feel like politicians are representing them, and they don't feel like they're being listened to. So I went after a 13-point agenda trying to go after a lot of that disconnect, just to make sure that the politicians start having direct consequences for every single one of their actions. So for example, one of the first points that I came up with, and again, this is 13 points just because it's what I could fit onto one page. I just wanted it to be easy, one page, with enough explanation for people to get the main idea of it. But the first one on the item is a salary reform for the politicians. So for example, for Congress, right now the starting salary is $174,000 a year. Whereas for my district, just to use those numbers, the median household income is about $72,000 a year. These numbers are pre-COVID, so I'd have to run them again afterwards to figure it out. But about $72,000 a year median household income with an unemployment rate of about 3%. So what I did is to have the politicians, instead of having a salary-based pay 2 to 3 times more than the median household income of their voters, I took the median household income minus that same unemployment rate, and then that's your pay for Congress. So it then turns it into a performance-based pay package that will increase when Congress does well and will decrease hurting their own paycheck if unemployment goes up or if the median household income comes down, so that they have direct and immediate consequences for their actions that are financially motivating them to make positive changes to benefit the rest of us, rather than coming in with stuff like they've done all year long and you shut down the economy, 40 million people unemployed, and okay, we're going to go bail out the big businesses. So now they've got actual consequences tied directly to their paycheck. And it's the same thing with the VA. Rather than coming in and say, okay, we're going to privatize the VA, or we're going to do whatever other VA reforms like most people like to talk about. And I think there's a lot of credibility to some of those reforms. The biggest thing that I wanted to see was whatever action the politicians make for the VA, they should have their own necks on the line the same as us. I talk in my campaign about how the healthcare for the men and women who fight our wars should be good enough for those who send us to war. So instead of the nice little healthcare that Congress has, put them all into the VA,
right.
Them and their immediate family members. So that way, instead of just a once in a while dog and pony show to see what goes on at the VA, they actually have to have their own healthcare taken care of at their local VA. See what we really have to go through. And then because their own neck is on the line the same as us, they'll have to go ahead and make the changes that would benefit the rest of the veterans.
You know, there's like this, I don't even know what you would call this. Okay, it's like this perception that politicians are just like extremely, extremely important people. And that's why they get paid so much. And that's why they have all this, you know, the best healthcare and like all this other stuff. And it's like, no, that's absolute bullshit. Like they should be suffering like the rest of us. And the only reason that they appear to be important is because they have all that stuff, which they've stolen from us. So it's almost like they've created, they've put up their own curtain so they can be the man behind the curtains.
Yeah, I mean, they've turned it into they rule over us and act like little kings and queens rather than representing the people like they're supposed to.
That's interesting. But I like, okay, so I like where you're going about definitely the healthcare, right? Let them have the same healthcare because then, you know, or let them pay for their own. I mean, they're earning enough money, right?
Yeah, I mean, we could let them pay for their own, but I mean, personally, I want them in the VA.
Right.
That's what they're putting on the veterans. They should have to, if they think it's good enough for us, then let's see them show that it's good enough for themselves. But I mean, they should have to
suffer everything through us too, right? If we have to stay home and we don't get paid for not working, they shouldn't get paid for not working.
I completely agree. That was actually one of the things that really drove me nuts in Iraq, because when I was there in, I think it was spring 2011, the government shut down for 3 weeks. Congress got paid. I was in a combat zone, having to go out on patrols with infantry, cavalry, and everybody else, la-di-da-di, everybody. I didn't get paid for 3 weeks. Nobody in Iraq got paid for 3 weeks while the government was shut down, and Congress did.
This is one that really pisses me off, and I know like not a lot of people have sympathy for the TSA, but this one really pisses me off as somebody who travels a lot, because every plane ticket I buy, there's a fee built into the price of the ticket to pay the TSA, and yet the TSA wasn't getting paid. So it's not like, you know, oh, well, the government's shut down, we can't figure out the budget, like we're not collecting taxes. It's like, I'm giving you money to give to the TSA and you can't figure out how to write them a check. Like,
well, yeah. And that's the thing that people, I think, have a hard time understanding, is a lot of people think the government cares about them, or they want the government to care about them. And really, I mean, you look at the TSA, you look at military, you look at anything else, the politicians don't care about anybody who works for them. And if they don't care about those of us who fight our wars, or TSA who has fees built into the system to pay TSA, then they're not going to care about the regular citizen, which is nothing to them more than a vote or a source of revenue through taxation.
And they're happy to hold us hostage for that too. I mean, that's
Absolutely.
exactly what that is. Like that, you know, it was a fight between Congress and Trump the last time it happened, and it was basically like, oh, we're gonna hold everybody hostage. We're gonna make sure nobody gets paid, and then everyone's gonna be like, ooh, support the troops. We have to pass the bill, and like that's what it is. Like they're using that as a weapon to convince us to pass a bill, and they've done this. They do this all the time. Like this was, you remember like the 2008 collapse.
Yeah.
And they did the
I cleaned up
exact
real
same
good then.
thing, except they held the entire country hostage,
Oh yeah.
saying, if you don't sign this bill right now, which they had like probably written months ago to bail out these banks, if you don't sign this right now, the entire economy is going to collapse. Sign it right now, and everybody vote for it right now. And that's how that went down. And it's like, this isn't the first time they've done this. They do it over and over and over again. We have to stop falling for this, people.
Well, and I think you're going to see a big shift from, especially like my generation, you know, the 30 and under. You're going to start seeing a big shift more towards that libertarianism, just because this generation, my generation, and some of the others have now lived through the 2008 crisis and now COVID. And a lot of the government response was much of the same thing for both 2008 and COVID. What did the government do? Bailed out the banks, bailed out the big businesses, and said, fuck you to everybody else. You still got people that we're hearing about that still haven't gotten their first round of stimulus checks, all
Right, but it's
$1,200 of it. Meanwhile, you've got Planned Parenthood being investigated for receiving money. BYU is being praised for having turned down their money that, in my opinion, they shouldn't have gotten to begin with.
I just feel like, and I mean, I know we're constantly changing. We're constantly, you and I are kind of on the same fight with a bunch of other people trying to wake up, more people to the reality of the way things work.
Right.
But I feel like even after 2008, like I remember 2008, that put a lot of that woke me up a lot, and it gave me a lot of fear about what the future is going to be. But I still talk to so many people who were just like, oh no, everything's back to normal now. And even like things that I didn't understand, like, because remember before 2008 there was 2001, we had 9/11, and that was a whole thing.
Right.
And
Yep.
I wasn't even paying attention before that, but I'm sure in the 90s, I know in the 80s there was another big crash. The 90s was the dot-com bubble. Like,
Right.
this stuff has happened over and over and over again, and I guess I wasn't even paying enough attention during the dot-com bubble to be able to blame that on government. I'm sure there's a way you could blame it on government if I looked hard enough. But like, so like I can't even, but like, and maybe that's part of the problem, right? So like the same people who are too young to pay attention to what's going on right now, in 5 years, they're going to look back and say like, oh yeah, there was that whole Corona pandemic thing, but like, that wasn't the government's fault. Like, I don't remember what happened. I wasn't paying attention. I just know there was chaos and disaster and everything, but like, not connect those dots and blame government for a single thing. And I think that's the dangerous part. But, and maybe this goes back to what we were talking about earlier, like if kids are paying attention, the people who are alive today, who are young, so that, because we have to learn from history, and every time the government screws us over, we have to learn. And if we can get younger people to learn from these things every time that they happen, instead of, letting them grow to, I mean, shit, I was what, 21, 22, when 9/11 happened, and that was my first awakening. So but if they would have got to me sooner, if one of these damn libertarians would have got to me sooner, like when I was 13,
right,
then it would have been a different story. And I think that's and going into 9/11, I totally bought all that shit for like a couple years. That I never would have bought it if they had got to me sooner. So I don't know. I think that's really important. But yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting cycle. But Adam Kokesh was on the other day, and he was pointing out that, like, we live in the most peaceful time, arguably. The number of people killed by government is lower than it's ever been, or like, crimes in general, killing, stealing, all that kind of stuff, which is debatable. But I don't know. I think that's all interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I would hope that we're moving towards a more peaceful environment, but it's tough to say with the way things are going on right now. I think there's a lot of anger and a lot of frustration, and hopefully that'll drive people to look for some solutions in the right places. But unfortunately, with it being the information age, there's a lot of information out there, and with that comes misinformation. So we'll have those people that will constantly have to keep trying to educate, but it's easier to access for those who do want to find the right information and do go out and look for it. And that's one of the key things that I think we really have going for us, especially with modern technology.
Right. Yeah, I mean, misinformation. There was I saw a clip of there was a protest. Everybody's out protesting the mask mandates. I forgot where this was, and I probably didn't even know where it was because people just post videos and they don't say where it is or anything these days.
Might have been Utah. I heard we had a big one that made national news recently. So
might have been, but so they picked the dumbest people to represent the anti-mask movement, and they did that on purpose. Maybe not the dumbest people, but like at least they made them look dumb. There was a kid who was obviously, trying to repeat a line that he couldn't remember. There was, older people who just like were saying all kinds of weird, ridiculous shit. And it's like they cherry pick those people to make and I don't want to get into the debate about whether or not Corona is real or anything like that, but they take that to cherry pick one side of the argument so that they can totally push the agenda that no, everybody must wear masks, and if you don't want to wear your mask, you must be some sort of a nutcase. And they don't have to say those words, they just have to associate those visually by having a nutcase saying don't wear a mask. And then it's like anybody who's like sane and rational who doesn't want to wear a mask will see that and say, oh my God, people are going to think I'm that guy. And so now it weakens your position, which is based on fact.
Yeah, it's a hard one because they definitely like to take and cut and edit everything together in a way that will sell better. It's all about that sensationalism. It's the reality TV show generation. We like the drama, and they know that sells. And unfortunately, that's what's taken over from actual meaningful conversation or actual reasoning behind a certain point. You'll take away the logic and instead throw up the emotion because it sells better.
Right. And of course, I don't know. I flip-flop between what I think the media is there for, between what gets good ratings or who's paying them more money.
Combination of the two.
Yeah.
Depends on which day and which topic it is.
And what station, too.
Exactly.
Yeah. But okay, so I want to go back to your platform and some of your some more of your points. What else you got on there?
So we're running on some things, just kind of going again off of that whole ending the disconnect between the politicians and the consequences of their actions. Some of those things are including, the pay and the veteran affairs is the two that I talk about for the most part for the short clips. But also running on term limits, I think are a big one that we need, just to get that cycle over. And one of the things that I deviate from the normal on term limits is usually when we talk about term limits, we talk about it for Congress. I actually think we need it for the Supreme Court as well and all federal judges. The way I took it was a combined 20 years of service in public office so that you can't go jump from the House of Representatives to the Senate over to the Supreme Court or to president and then 20 years in each and you're in forever. It's combined 20 years, everything, then you're out. And the reason I went with 20 years was just because 20 years is usually what we associate for retirement in the military. And again, if it's good enough for military, then good enough for politics. So combined 20 years for term limits seemed like a good way to go, just to make sure people aren't jumping around different political offices to get around it. But
yeah, that still doesn't keep them from jumping between Monsanto and the Supreme Court, but
yeah, hopefully it acts as a little bit of a barrier.
It's progress.
But progress in the right direction, better than the just whenever you get voted out or die that we have now.
Right. Yeah, that's absolutely nuts. And like, I say this as somebody who watched my grandfather descend into dementia. I get it. Yeah, some people can live to be 100 and they can be like sharp as a tack, but yeah, I don't know. This whole Supreme Court system seems kind of.
So this is actually part of my agenda that I had to tone down a little bit because I started catching some slack on it earlier this year, but suddenly, thank you, Joe Biden, it is now much more better received because I actually have in my term limits, part of that is a maximum age limit for office at the age of 65. And those are to complement the minimum age requirements that we currently have for office Like Congress, there's a minimum age requirement of 25. For president, it's minimum age requirement of 35. It's a double standard to not have a maximum age limit. We've got people that are in way too long. The 20 years combined service isn't going to take care of it all on its own. If there's a reason that we have to have age minimums, then there's a reason we should have age maximums. Just, again, ending some of those double standards. And that would take care of some of the things like the people who are obviously probably not quite fit to be serving in office, to put it nicely.
Yeah. And it's interesting that you picked 65 too. So you've got you're basically forcing them into retirement at the same time as everybody else.
Exactly. And that was the big reason I picked 65, is because that's when we get talked about in this nation of that's about retirement age. That's when you should be looking at Social Security and your 401k and your IRAs and everything else. So you know what? If the politicians are going to tell us that about 65 is good enough for the rest of us to retire, then shouldn't they be retiring that age as well? Because from where I'm sitting, DC is just starting to look like the nation's most posh retirement home. Like, personally, I'm sick of seeing people move to DC who should be moving to Florida. So
it's interesting. At the same time, that might give them the incentive to say, oh, well, we're gonna raise the retirement age to 75 before you get your Social Security.
Wouldn't it be great if that happened, so that if you wanted to work longer than, 72 or 75, when the mandatory you have to start withdrawing from your 401ks and Social Security, maybe they bumped that up too. If they want to stay in office, then they got to bump that up so that the rest of the people can keep working instead of having to take out stuff earlier than they'd want.
I mean, I guess, but I mean, like the whole thing, like 401ks just piss me off, because it's like the whole purpose of that is to save on taxes, which nobody should be paying in the first place.
Right. I mean, I can argue against 401ks all day too. It's just an example.
Yeah. No, but I mean, yeah, it is interesting. And like, what's interesting too is, like, you notice that, like, some people have certain jobs that they want to have no matter how old they get.
Right.
And it's because, like, I mean, I don't know if they enjoy their jobs or they just enjoy the power, or they, is it, I mean, I like to say, what politicians do with us is a game to them, right? It's like they're playing, a giant game of Sim City, and they're just totally screwing with us, and they just love doing it, and that's what they do to pass the time, which is completely evil. But that's how I feel some of these people when they get like power drunk. That's what they like to do. Compared to somebody who's working in a factory that just, like, absolutely hates it, because, like, I'm just making these same nuts and bolts day after day after day. I'm tired of it. I want to be out of here. And what I think is really interesting is, like, I've been on this whole thing about how we should all be retiring earlier. We should all be praying that our jobs will be replaced by robots. And if the government weren't stealing from us, then of course we wouldn't have to worry about losing our house for not being able to pay the property tax. We wouldn't,
right.
We'd be saving all the money, like, if we did work for 5 or 10 years. And so in that way, we'd actually be lowering the retirement age, not because of, like, anything like, oh, you get benefits or anything like that, just because you save all your money, and it's like, fuck this, I don't want to be working for the rest of my life. I'm going to enjoy the money that I've saved, and it's going to last me for the rest of my life. Go do all that stuff that, like, travel the world and enjoy seeing everything and flying all over the place and doing all that kind of stuff. Like, as a retired person who doesn't have a job to get back to, when you can really enjoy it, but because you've been able to, like, save up enough money, and everything is basically free at this point because robots are doing everything for us.
Yeah. Well, and that would be, like, a big one that would really help people to be able to retire, as you mentioned, the property tax. And that's really the tough one, because once you retire, there's no getting around property tax. That's still money that you owe, even though you're not working anymore.
Forever. And yeah, and this is why, I mean, like, people don't realize, like, okay, let's say you live in a place where it's a 1% property tax. If your parents bought a house and they lived in that house and they paid it off, or your grandparents even, 100 years later, then another 100 years later, you're paying the price of that house. And of course, with inflation, it's going to keep going up. You're paying for that house over and over and over again every 100 years with a 1% tax.
Right.
Which means
and
you're buying that back when it was already paid for, and you could just live in that house for generation and generation and generation without having to, worry about anything, just some maintenance.
Right. It takes away the ownership. It puts you more into a renter position with the government as your landlord, and it enslaves you to having to constantly have an income to be able to afford the property tax.
Absolutely. Oh, I love that, man. Well, and let me get your opinion on this one then. The FHA. So I did some math and some basic consideration of some of the things I already knew. When you go into a bank, they don't ask you how much you want to spend on a house, right? First, they do this pre-approval thing, right? Which is they look at your income. How much can you afford to spend every month?
You know who was responsible for that one too?
Who?
That was Obama with the Dodd-Frank Act.
But was it? Because I feel like this was even before that.
It might have been before, but when Obama came in and introduced Dodd-Frank, it was that was the stipulation that put you at your mortgage or rent couldn't be more than 2/3 of your income.
Oh, so they limited it.
Yeah.
Couldn't be more than 2/3.
Right.
So, but here's the thing: you go in, you get pre-approval, right? So, what is the bank? So, without even looking at a house, the bank just tells you this is the most amount of money we will ever possibly give you. And so now you're looking at this number. Oh, the bank says they'll give me $300,000. I'm going to go buy a $300,000 house.
Yeah.
And it's like, wait a minute. You realize if you would get a 100,000, yeah, but the bank says they're going to give me 300,000. Why would I? This is what I'm worth. Why would I live in anything less than that? But what that also means is like, okay, if you're in the market for a house, I mean, you take this and you're like, okay, I want to put an offer in on this house, and you got to show them the pre-approval letter to make sure like you're caught. Oh, well, it says here the bank's going to give you 300 grand, so you lose some negotiation power there, right? Maybe you could talk them down to 250, but they're like, oh, but you're approved for 300. It's okay, yeah, 300 is great. It just takes all this away, but that number that the bank gives you, the 300, before FHA would have been closer to about 100. And the reason is, before FHA, banks wouldn't lend money for more than 10 years. It would be 5 to 10 years. And so think about it. If you get a loan and they say, okay, we know from your income you can afford $1,000 a month. Well, what's $1,000 a month for 10 years versus $1,000 a month for 30 years?
Right.
And so basically, like, yeah, we'll give you a shit ton more money. And the only reason they're doing that is because the government's backing it up. And then, of course, you don't even have to save any money because they'll give you a 3% down deal, which is even more insane.
And then the prices of the housing go up because you can afford more, the same way that the price of tuition went up because you can afford more thanks to federal grants, everything else, and federal assistance for schooling. Yeah, I mean, it's the same thing. Everything the government does and they touch, they have the complete opposite of whatever good intentions they claim to have when they started it. Because they come in, they provide more money, so then you're entitled to more money, but then you have regulations and zoning committees and everything else that stifle the supply and the demand, so you just have inflation all over the place.
Right. It's the fine print, which you don't even get to see because you're not, like the fine print with the bank, at least you get the bill and you're like, holy shit, what are all these fees? And they're like, oh yeah, that's what you signed for, it's in your contract. But with the government, it's like, oh yeah, no, we inflated the currency. Why are the prices going up? That's the fine print. But you can't even point to your contract and say, like, that's why you're getting that inflation, because you signed it right here. Like, no, it's totally hidden.
Well, this is one of the things that I really struggle with the education system, because if we're talking about, the Department of Education, and we want to keep funding public education, again, if you do, I'm personally in favor of homeschooling. We can get into that topic different time. But if we want to keep funding public education, one of the best things we could do to start helping people move up the economic ladder is financial literacy courses, because we currently have almost none. And then you have people having the exact same problem you're talking about with not understanding the loans that they're getting into for houses, not being able to understand filing taxes, not understanding credit. And they just end up in this cyclical struggle that they were never taught the skills to understand so they could have the tools to get out of it.
Right.
and it just feeds the ignorance to help fuel the banking system, the FHA loans for people to get taken advantage of the way that they have been.
So let me ask you a question, Mr. Representative.
Yes.
A bill comes across your desk, or I guess a bill comes to the floor to vote to eliminate FHA. Yay or nay?
Yay.
Awesome. Okay. All right. I like that.
I'm in favor of ending government subsidies altogether. I mean, whether we're talking about oil, corn, FHA, equipment being transferred from the military to law enforcement to subsidize law enforcement.
Oh, yeah.
I'm in favor of ending all of the subsidies. The government shouldn't be picking winners and losers. It shouldn't be creating artificial monopolies like it has this year for Amazon, driving Amazon stock up over 80% last time I checked since March.
Wow.
Stop subsidizing anything.
Yeah.
It's a problem that we see over and over again. I mean, this is one that we get into with climate change that I've been talking a lot about recently, just because it's a big topic again at the moment, thanks to the fires. And really, it's the same story every single time. The biggest problem is that government has been subsidizing an industry that has created artificial problems and stifled innovation that would be there to solve problems better than they are currently if they didn't have that uphill battle to climb against thanks to subsidies.
Right. Yeah, and it's with subsidies you get lower prices, but that also screws out the little mom and pop shops who are not they don't have the lawyers to wade through all the paperwork to get the subsidies.
Yeah, I mean, like the stimulus package for COVID, look at it the same way as a subsidy. Who got the most from it? It was by far big business, higher education systems, and very, very, very little actually went to the average citizen.
Yeah.
Every time we subsidize anything, it's a wealth transfer from the poor to the wealthy.
Holy shit. I'm just pulling up Amazon stock here. It went from 1,800 a year ago to 3,100 now.
Yeah. So the key one to look at is about March 13th to March 17th is when you want to take a look at a lot of the stock prices.
March 13th.
Because that's about when the lockdowns kicked in. So in March 13th, when the lockdown started, it went down to $17.85 a share, and it's currently at $3,169 a share. So that's a 7% dip on or a 2.14% dip on March 13th, and then add that to the up of 73. So you got it's about 76% that it's up right now since the lockdown started, and that's just because nobody had competition to fight against Amazon. Right. Amazon got all that business because everybody else was shut down. Nobody could really leave their home. So what are they doing? They're ordering stuff off Amazon. They're watching Netflix. They're going to Facebook. Google's getting a lot more traffic on their sites. So that's why those stocks all went up while all these other businesses are going under.
And here's another subsidy of Amazon that people don't think about. It's the question that libertarians are asked all the time. Without taxes, who would build the roads? Amazon would build the roadth because they're not going to deliver any of those packages without them.
God, words are hard. Who built the railroads back in the day? It wasn't the U.S. government. Largely, it was Vanderbilt.
Yeah, exactly.
One guy built most of the railroads in the United States, starting from a shipping yard in New Jersey, I think it was, that Vanderbilt got started. You'd have the same thing with the roads. You'd have, like you said, Amazon, Facebook would build roads. FedEx would probably build some roads since they need the shipping lanes.
Absolutely. Man.
Although technically it would be the same people building them because it would just be the construction companies. It would be different people taking care of the contracts, most likely.
Right. The money would choose a different path to get there.
Right.
Interesting. All right, let's. We're coming up towards the end of the show, but I want to get let's get one more of your points in here, and then of course I'll give you a chance to give off your websites and ask for support and anything like that. But yeah, let's hear another one of your points first.
All right. So one of the other points that I talk about is ballot initiative protection. That stems from the fact that we've had ballot initiatives here in the state of Utah that didn't pass. I've seen it in other states where the people vote on something and the politicians come through and say, nope, we don't want it. We just had that happen back in 2018 with Proposition 2 in our state, which was medical marijuana reform. And it passed by the people's vote, and then the politicians came through and said no. So there's been a lawsuit that has been waging for almost 2 years now against our state through some advocacy groups that just dropped the lawsuit, looking to see what they're going to be going from here. The article just came out today. But, our politicians are supposed to be representative of the people. Again, not supposed to be acting like they rule over us like kings and queens that they think they are. If the people come through and they say we want medical marijuana done, then the politician's job should be to enact it. They're supposed to be representing the people. So if we're going to be representing the people, ballot initiative protection made some sense to me on this one, because it's the people's voice that should be represented in politics, not just to be slashed away later being, we know better than you.
Right. This seems to me like, if you think about it, it's really just a bunch of bureaucratic bullshit. Because, so the people who these other people represent said, we want a certain law to pass. We want this to be the law. And like, if you have a democracy, the will of the people, and not that I entirely agree with this system, because that leads to all kinds of bad laws being passed. But
right.
In this particular example, this is the will of the people. And so at that point, it's really a matter of bureaucratic process to say, okay, the people voted for this, it passed, therefore we have to take this bill and enter it into the books, make it law, get it signed by the governor, do all this stuff, blah, 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 give it to the police so the police can enforce it and update their policies and procedures and do it. And this is all just like bureaucratic, this and that. But it's like, at what point do we say, okay, you know what? They didn't sign the paperwork. We don't care. That's the law. We had a big-ass election. Everybody voted. It passed. We're going to act like this is the law. And if somebody gets in our way and tries to arrest us for doing the opposite of what we voted for, or for doing what we voted for, then that person is in violation of the law. But it's like, it's funny that like, we look at like even police as like some, we try to frame them as heroes in society, and it's like, really they're just bureaucrats. Right. That's what was written down on the paper, and I can't do anything else until the paper orders say something different. And that's absolute nonsense. This is like, if there's one thing wrong with our society, I mean, there's a million things wrong, but if there's one thing, it's like, forget what the fucking paper says. Use your head.
Yeah. I mean, you would think, but I mean, common sense just isn't all that common. Like, personally, I think it's ridiculous that I even have to put this in an agenda, because the whole point of this nation, again, is to a nation of the people, by the people, for the people. So if it's a nation of the people, then shouldn't they be doing what the people want, not sitting there telling them we know better than you, so kick rocks?
Right.
So I don't know, it's crazy.
That's nuts.
We've seen it all over, different states, different things, even here in Utah. I mean, we had all last year, we were fighting a tax reform bill that would have raised taxes on things like our food at the grocery stores and other things like that we fought like crazy to get kicked out. And the politicians the whole time ranted and raved against us, just all kinds of mad that we were stupid. We didn't know what we were talking about. And it's like, we successfully passed a referendum. You try to tell us, no, we're stupid. Now we're telling you that you're stupid. But it's just ridiculous that it has to keep coming down to this point of court battles and referendums and all these other things to get the politicians to do kind of half of what we told them to do. And they still try and find ways to circumvent the will of the people and instead just do the will of what they themselves want that just enriches themselves.
This is the problem with career politicians. That becomes their job.
Yep.
And that's what they do 24/7 is figure out, how do we when are the people not going to be paying attention? 4th of July, they're going to be out having a barbecue. Let's pass this law.
Yeah. So that tax referendum that we fought last year in Utah, that was passed about 2 weeks before Christmas in a special session.
Yep. There you go. That's how the income tax was passed, I think.
Yeah. It's about how they like to do everything.
Yeah. It's nuts. Anyways,
it's crazy, and that's just one of the things I'm trying to hope to get rid of is just that whole mentality of them acting like they rule over us instead of representing us.
Yeah. So I want to give you an opportunity, of course, to plug your campaign, ask for support. If anybody's interested in volunteering, do they have to be in your district? Can they help from anywhere? You looking for donations? Where can we go to donate?
So, I mean, the easiest way to help out with the campaign, if you don't live in the district or you don't have any funds that you can donate, I get it. COVID's a hard year for everybody all around. Like, share, subscribe, all that stuff on social media just to help boost our algorithms. That is always a huge help. So for YouTube is probably the easiest place to say to go to find everything because the channel is Molnar 2020. And right there in the description of every single video, I have the campaign agenda in text along with every single link to something associated with the campaign, whether that's Twitter, Facebook, the actual website, donation link, everything like that. So if you go on to YouTube, Molnar 2020, and then just any of the videos in there, you can click on them, watch them, and right there in the description, it'll link you to everything else. So if you can donate, I would very much appreciate it. Would definitely help fuel some of our advertising stuff to get the word out there and try and win this. But if not, always do appreciate the likes and the shares on anything social media related to help out with the algorithms, just to get the word out.
Awesome. And I just went there and subscribed right now. Awesome. Well, this has really been awesome. I wish we had more time to keep talking and hear the rest of those points. If somebody wants to see all those points, where can we go?
So there, just like I said in the description for the videos on YouTube, if you click the description, it'll actually pull up the full text right below all of those links.
Okay, awesome.
So I tried to leave everything really easy and concise to find on YouTube. Figured that would just make everybody's lives simpler.
Awesome, cool. Well, thank you so much for joining. And anyone listening, if you like what John's got to say, go check him out. Go make a donation. Go throw some support. Go share his videos. If you know anybody in Utah, send them his way and get them interested. And as a matter of fact, I was just talking to someone today, and I thought this might be a fun exercise for this. If you were listening and you like what John has to say, go find one person. This is your homework. Go find one person and talk to them. Just mention John, introduce them, or talk about one of the ideas that we were talking about today and share those with somebody and see how they react. It doesn't have to be somebody you already know is a libertarian or an anarchist. Share it with somebody new. Maybe share it with a stranger and see how they react and just see how the conversation goes. No agenda, just have the conversation. Of course, make sure if you like this podcast, if you like this show, this live stream, make sure to share it, like it, comment it, retweet it. Do everything you can to help spread the word because, of course, this information is really important. It's not just about winning elections as much as we love these votes. There's so much more to the way that we need to change our society and the way that we think, and that's what we do through these conversations. So this is super important, and sharing this with everybody you can is really it's you changing the world, literally. So do that as much as you can, as often as you can. And of course, come back tomorrow. We've got another amazing guest, and we're going to be going strong. We've got 5 episodes a week booked for like the next 2 or 3 weeks. So keep tuning in, and I'll see you guys next time. Taxation is theft. I'll catch you guys later.